Usher, thank you for listening to the Station of the Cross, proclaiming the fullness of truth with clarity and charity.
Heard around the world on your Android and Apple mobile devices.
The Simple Truth, rising up to explore the difficult topics of real life. Join us as we proclaim the good, the true, and the beautiful with the simple truth of Jesus Christ and His Holy Catholic Church through Scripture, tradition, and the Catechism. And now, your host, Jim Havens.
Great to be back with you on The Simple Truth, where we proclaim the life-giving reality of Jesus and His Catholic Church. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of Saint Joseph. It is Current Events Wednesday, and our guest today is Professor Roberto de Mattei, a Catholic husband and father of 5, as well as a Catholic historian who has taught in several Italian universities. Between 2003 and 2011, he served as vice president of the National Research Council, the highest Italian scientific institution. He is president of the Lepanto Foundation and is editor of the magazine Radici Cristiane and the news agency Corrispondenza Romana. He is the author of 35 books, including the Second Vatican Council, An Unwritten Story from 2011, Love for the Papacy and Filial Resistance to the Pope in the History of the Church from 2019, and his newest book, recently published this year by Sophia Institute Press, Saint Pius V, the legendary Pope who excommunicated Queen Elizabeth I, standardized the Mass, and defeated the Ottoman Empire. You can find it at sophiainstitute.com. Professor de Mattei is coming to us live from Rome. Professor, thank you for being with us. How are you?
Thank you.
Great blessing to have you with us. Your book on Pope Saint Pius V, outstanding, at 366 pages, yet a very accessible, fascinating, important read. It's a great blessing to have you on here with us today to help our audience to grow in familiarity with this great saint, Saint Pius V, the incredible history that surrounds him, and how many lessons there are to learn that apply well to our own present day. But first, as we always do on this Wednesday current event show, it's important that we always lead off by remembering that the number one news story today that ought to be reported by all the networks is actually going unreported today and every day, and that is the ongoing daily government-sanctioned, government-protected, government-funded mass murder of innocent children in the wombs of their mothers. These are real people being murdered by the thousands today and every day in our nation, which also means the mass exploitation of pregnant moms in need for profit by the lie of abortion. In terms of the loss of human life, we have at least a 9/11 every day in the U.S. Imagine 3,000 of any other category of persons being murdered in a given day in our nation, and it going unreported by the media and even mostly ignored by the churches. And imagine if that was happening every day, and you begin to understand something of the insane reality in which we find ourselves. According to a July 2020 article in The Lancet, we have a global death toll from abortion of 73.3 million children annually, which is over 200,000 preborn children being murdered worldwide every day. It is essential that we put great effort into breaking through our own desensitization to this massive evil. We have to face reality on this and so much more. We must live, proclaim, push forward the vision that every innocent human being, without exception, has a right to life. Even an atheist still ought to have the basic moral sense to see the evil of killing an innocent child. For those who believe in Jesus and His Catholic Church, we have the additional benefit of crystal clear, authoritative magisterial teaching on this, which truly gives us absolutely no place to hide in treating those in the womb as any less valuable than us. Catechism of the Catholic Church 2270, quote, "Human life must be respected and protected absolutely from the moment of conception. From the very first moment of his existence, a human being must be recognized as having the rights of a person, among which is the inviolable right of every innocent human being to life," end of quote. Also, if you've experienced abortion in some way as a mother, father, sibling, grandparent, etc., there are some great people, great resources available to help you in your healing process. We love you. You are not alone. Go to lovewillendchildkilling.com and click on the Healing tab for more information. Connecting all of this to our topic today, Professor de Mattei, in your view, if Saint Pius V could be dropped into the seat of Peter today, what do you believe he would do as Pope to combat the evil of abortion in our time?
The Church's mission is to spread the truth of the gospel and the natural law throughout the world, and to condemn any error that is opposed to the natural and the Christian order. And abortion, that is the killing of an innocent human being, has always been prohibited by the Church. Saint Pius V condemned all the moral evils of his time, and I am convinced that if he were alive today, he would condemn abortion with the same vigor with which John Paul II condemned it, and I'm convinced that he would excommunicate all pro-abortion political leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And this because the Church has only spiritual weapons to defend the truth, and one of these weapons is excommunication. I believe that public heretics should be excommunicated, and among them those who defend abortion, homosexuality, or any public denial of divine and natural law, because in this way the Church would affirm her moral authority, since the Church is not a political institution but a spiritual and moral institution, the highest in the world, and its st is to proclaim the truth of Jesus Christ, and this was the perspective of Saint Pius V.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. It's an act of charity, and Saint Pius V was a man of heroic charity. This book that you've written, Saint Pius V, it's stacked with historical facts surrounding his pontificate of Pope Saint Pius V. They serve important lessons for our own time. Is that one of the reasons that you decided to write this book? And do you believe, what do you believe is the most important lesson for the Church today to take away from the life of Saint Pius V?
All popes have a divine mission, but they can fulfill this mission in different ways. They can be saints or sinners. They can be good popes or bad popes. The papacy, however, is not an abstract institution. It needs to be represented, embodied by concrete men. And this means that we must love the papacy because it is a divine institution, but we cannot love it abstractly. We must love the papacy concretely in the men who represented it with a greater perfection. And since we cannot love what we don't know, we must know which were the best popes in history, the holiest popes, the popes who governed the Church with a greater perfection. And among the popes of the modern era, the short but intense pontificate of Pius V, because it was only 6 years, 1566 to 1572. Well, this pontificate seems to me a model because of his holiness in governing the Church and for the richness of his teaching. And so the most important lesson to be taken from the life of Saint Pius V is, in my opinion, his example of a militant Christianity without compromise with the modern world.
Yeah, outstanding. Yeah, you point out in the book that in his classic work, The Liturgical Year, Dom Geringer writes that, quote, he writes, quote, Pius V's entire life was a battle, end of quote. And you make it clear in your book that St. Pius V was a true soldier of Christ who fought with great energy against the internal enemies of the soul and the enemies both inside and outside of the church, and that all this flowed from a life of continual prayer. You also point out that the auditors responsible for examining his life and whether he was worthy of beatification and canonization reported under oath that Pius V had died a virgin, that he never committed a single mortal sin in all of his life, and that he had possessed all the virtues in a heroic degree. Tell us about that continual life of prayer that was at the core of the abundant good fruit that came forth in and through St. Pius V.
Yes. Saint Pius V was a resolute and a combative pope who personally involved himself in military matters. According to his biographer Catena, he loved good soldiers no less than holy men, and he had the intention of constructing a militia, a little army of 9,000 chosen soldiers, 3,000 of whom would serve in the name of the church wherever was necessary. And he fought against the external and internal enemies of the church, Ottoman Turks and Protestants. Pius V not only barred the path against these two enemies, preserving the
Yeah, we're coming up on a hard break, so we're going to pause right here. We'll come right back on the other side of the break, hear more about this combative Pope in the best of ways, and more about his prayer life and so much more. You've got to stay tuned, stick with us. St. Pius V, you got to get to know him and learn these lessons that we're going through today on the show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
In the New Testament's first letter of St. John, chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, we read, "And we have this confidence in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us in regard to whatever we ask, we know that what we have asked him for is ours." It's incredible to realize how much God loves us, what he has promised us, and what he'll give us through our trust in him. Have you prayed for the Station of the Cross today? We would be grateful if you would remember us each day in your prayers, whether it's the Most Holy Rosary of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Chaplet of Divine Mercy, the Liturgy of the Hours, the Most Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, or any other prayers you pray throughout the day. Please also pray for the intentions of your fellow Catholic radio listeners. It's so important for us to remember to keep one another in prayer.
Do you love listening to the Station of the Cross on your car radio, but sometimes find yourself driving outside the listening area? Never miss another minute of your favorite show. Download the iCatholic Radio app so you can listen anywhere in the world 24 hours a day. The iCatholic Radio app is available for your phone in the Apple Store or for your Android phone in Google Play. Visit thestationofthecross.com for more information. There's so much confusion in our world today over what love is. By displaying a Catholic Radio bumper magnet on your car, you'll help others understand love as designed by God. Order your free bumper magnets at thestationofthecross.com. We'd be happy to send bumper magnets for your listening area so that others can come to know the Lord. That's thestationofthecross.com. Thank you for sharing Catholic Radio on the road.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. It is Current Events Wednesday with our guest today, Professor Roberto de Mattei. He's a Catholic historian, also the author of St. Pius V, the legendary Pope, who excommunicated Queen Elizabeth I, standardized the Mass, and defeated the Ottoman Empire. You can find it at Sophia Institute www.unwrittenstory.com. Professor de Mattei, before the break, you were sharing with us about this combative pope in the best of ways, Saint Pius V. His entire life was a battle, and much of that flowing from his interior life, his life of prayer. Anything more you want to finish saying about that for us?
Yes. Saint Pius V fought against the external and internal enemies of the Church, Ottoman Turks and Protestants. And the secret of this activity, the secret of this militant spirit was this supernatural spirit, the spirit of prayer, and above all, the Holy Rosary. As a Dominican, Pope Pius V had always promoted the Rosary, but this was particularly true in respect of the Holy League, which he created for the Battle of Lepanto. And he attributed the victory at Lepanto to Our Lady when he named the anniversary of this battle the Feast of Our Lady of Victories, and proclaimed Our Lady Auxilium Christianorum, the help of Christians. So the secret of his spirituality was, in my view, the devotion to Our Lady.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned Protestantism, Protestants as an enemy to the Church. People, sadly, there's confusion now about how this all works, because Protestantism has seeped into so much even within the Church. But leading up to the Pontificate of Saint Pius V, again from 1566 to 1572, the Protestant Revolution emerged in the first half of the 16th century. You write, quote, "What history has labeled the Protestant Reformation was in reality a religious revolution, and thus a pseudo-reform," meaning it was a fake reform. Luther was not really reforming those serious abuses that did in fact exist. Rather, he was advancing new errors and a new heresy of Protestantism that was actually backed by the humanists, who espoused the very ideology which was responsible for much of the grave corruption within the human element of the Church at that time in the first place. You quote a German Protestant theologian and a historian who writes, quote, "The humanists were the first to accept Luther and ensure that he had a lasting following. They were the ones who first made his cause a far-reaching movement. Without them, the humanists, he, Luther, would have failed as many failed before him who sought to rise up against the old Church. We can say this with certainty: without humanism, there would have been no Reformation," end of quote, meaning Protestant Revolution. Can you help us to better understand the cultural revolution that was humanism and Renaissance, and how humanists made use of Luther and the Protestant Revolution to advance their own goals?
Yes. During the 14th and the 15th centuries, Italy was the center of a profound transformation of mentality and customs, a transformation which progressively extended to include all of Christianity. And this cultural revolution took the name humanism, because placed man at the center of the universe, substituting earthly happiness based on love of self in lieu of supernatural happiness oriented to the love of God. The artistic expression of this movement was called the Renaissance. And at the beginning of the 16th century, the 16th century was the century of Saint Pius V. In this century, the city of Rome, the seat of the Catholic Church, offered the spectacle of a great development of the arts, but also that of a profound moral decadence. The climate of the papal household was the same as all the other principal courts of Italy, such as Naples, Venice, Florence, with an alternation of banquets, hunting, and pagan parties. The popes lived like princes, patrons of the arts, diplomats, leaders, and they seemed to be concerned with the temporal interests of their states more than with this supernatural good of souls. This climate of moral corruption paved the way for Protestantism, which presented itself as a false response to a strong and authentic demand for moral reform. Luther, however, claimed to react against humanism by accepting its cultural premises. For example, the Lutheran principle of free examination derived from the philology of the humanists, who first preached the free interpretation of the Holy Scriptures. Therefore, Protestant historian Roland Benton affirms that Luther became an international personality thanks to the support of the humanists. Benton says that the call to return to the simplicity of the New Testament of Luther, his annoyance with scholastic subtleties, his denunciation of indulgences, of the veneration of relics, of the cult of the saints, well, all accorded perfectly with the humanist program.
Yeah, great. There's a great history you go through here in your text, Saint Pius V, on the Protestant Revolution, the beginnings of it, up through the early years. It's so connected with the pontificate, with that time in the 16th century, Saint Pius V, and at the same time, there was an authentic Catholic reform that was also underway, which was not caused by the Protestant Revolution, but began, in fact, well before Luther, and the emergence of Protestantism only served to increase it and better define it, you write. You mention how St. Robert Bellarmine writes that on the eve of the Protestant heresy, the Lord wanted in a certain way to contrast the severe mortifications of St. Francis of Paula with the rebellious sensualism of Luther, showing what could have been the path of authentic Christian reform, that path of St. Francis of Paula. Can you explain this further?
Well, what history has labeled the Protestant Reformation was in reality a religious revolution and thus a pseudo-reform. In the 16th century, because the humanistic and the pagan spirit had penetrated the heart of the Church, it was necessary to bring to a conclusion a spiritual reform. And St. Pius V accomplished the great Tridentine reform, and he felt especially close to those souls who offered their life for the reform of the Church, such as Saint Cajetan, Saint Philip Neri, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, Saint Charles Borromeo, and many others. Protestant and liberal historiography called this Catholic reaction the Counter-Reformation, in order to imply that it was a movement without a soul, purely repressive. But the term Counter-Reformation, like the term medieval, has today lost all negative meaning and may be tranquilly used to indicate the authentic Catholic reform of the 16th century, which was caused not by the Protestant Revolution, but by the supernatural principle that constitutes the soul of the Church. And a veritable legion of saints flowered before, during, and after the Council of Trent, which was the great Catholic response to the Lutheran Revolution. And the history of the 16th century teaches us that the true reformers are the saints who have not attributed the faults of men to the Church, but have assumed those faults upon themselves in the image of our Lord. And they did not claim to change the constitution of the Church, but they strove to change themselves, and through their example to change others. Mm-hmm. The false reformers, on the other hand, are those who argue that the cause of evil lies not in the men of the Church, but in the Church itself, and who therefore want to change the way of governments, the sacraments, and the teaching of the Church, adapting them to their own opinions or to the opinions of the world.
Yeah, extremely important point there. And as you mentioned, Saint Pius V carried out the authentic Catholic reform while combating the errors of the Protestant heresy at the time. And the Council of Trent that you mentioned, when you say Tridentine reform, just so people understand, that means the reforms, Tridentine referring to the Council of Trent, which occurred 1545 to 1563. The Council of Trent closed only about 3 years before St. Pius V's pontificate began. You write that if the Council of Trent is the reforming council par excellence in the history of the Church, then St. Pius V is the reforming pope par excellence in the history of the Church. What are the most important reforms that took place under St. Pius V?
Yes, the religious ideal of the Tridentine Council was always at the center of the pontiff's concerns, of the Saint Pius V concerns, in order to purify the Church of the abuses and the corruptions that she suffered during this time. And Pius V, followed by his successors, Gregory XIII and Sixtus V, along with the great saints Philip Neri and Charles Borromeo, infused the life into the Tridentine decrees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Professor Roberto de Mattei. Fascinating text, St. Pius V. We're going a little bit deeper today, a little bit more dense than normal. We've got a genuine, outstanding historian of our time reaching back and teaching us the history of St. Pius V and so many important lessons about this man and about all that was surrounding him in that time. We're trying to connect the dots and apply that to today. We're gonna do more of that as we continue on. Great blessing to have Professor de Mattei with us. When we get back, we're going to have much more. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
This is a segment about small Catholic innovations that made a huge impact from the OSV Institute for Catholic Innovation. Long before Wimbledon, a group of Catholic monks in 12th century France were taking a break in their courtyard. I imagine it went something like this. A monk, I'll call him Brother Leo, shouts, "Take this, Brother John." He tosses a ball to Brother John, and Brother John, a little startled, swings his hand, smacks the ball back, yelling, "Take this, Brother Leo." On and on they play until their superior comes marching out, yelling, "What are you two doing?" Brother Leo replies, "It was just a game of take this." But in French, the word for take this is tenez. So that may not be the actual story, but you can thank Catholic Innovation for tennis. Learn more about what OSV Institute is doing to inspire and encourage Catholic innovation at osvinstitute.com.
This is Rick Paolini
and Father Jacek Mazer.
Join us every Sunday morning at 11 for Divine Mercy in My Soul.
We are in a time of mercy.
Absolutely.
But we must take advantage of it.
I was just about to say, we need to take a good advantage of it, make good use out of it in order to be treated with mercy at the end.
So tune in for Divine Mercy in My Soul every Sunday morning at 11.
And catch the encore presentation every Tuesday evening at 8.
Jezu ufam Tobie.
Jesus, I trust in you.
30 seconds on the gifts of the Holy Spirit, brought to you by the Station of the Cross. The gift of piety is explained in the Catechism of the Catholic Church as the gift which leads one to devotion to God. In St. Paul's letter to the Romans, he writes, "The Spirit you received is not the spirit of slaves, it is the spirit of sons, and it makes us cry out, Abba, Father." The gift of piety stirs up in us the desire to love, respect, and honor our Lord.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. Current Events Wednesday. Our guest today, Professor Roberto de Mattei, Catholic historian, author of Saint Pius V, the legendary Pope who excommunicated Queen Elizabeth I, standardized the Mass, and defeated the Ottoman Empire. Find it at sophiainstitute.com. Professor, we left off, you were explaining to us important reforms, the most important reforms that took place under Saint Pius V.
Yes. For example, the Council of Trent approved the decree on the residence of bishops, affirming that in order to begin to reestablish the decadent ecclesiastical discipline and to correct the corrupt morals of the clergy, it was necessary to begin with those in charge of the major churches. The integrity of those who preside is, in fact, the Council says, the salvation of their subjects. And the first point was the obligation of all pastors to reside with their flock. Pius V therefore required that all those who were responsible for episcopal and patriarchal sees, as well as cardinals, archbishops, and bishops, should reside in their dioceses and parishes and carry out their proper duties according to the decrees of the Council of Trent. One of the most important prescriptions of the Council of Trent was the erection of seminaries in every diocese for the education of the clergy. And Pius V wrote many times that among all the prescriptions of the Council, none was as beneficial and in keeping with the times than the decree on seminaries. And another example with regard to religious orders, Pius V imposed the cloister, the choral office, and the solemn profession on all orders, addressed the age limits, and banned living outside of the convent or passing from one order to another. He recommended the virtue of obedience, exhorting all religious to promptly obey their superiors. And there is a last point. There were those who believed that a remedy to the religious crisis could be found in the abandonment of ecclesiastical celibacy. Emperor Maximilian II himself had proposed this to Pius V, but from his very first audience with the German ambassador, Saint Pius V, wanting to prevent any new effort in this direction, said, "I ask your sovereign, I ask to the emperor, to not wish to renew the motion already made, because I absolutely would not be able to accept it." And the abolition of ecclesiastical celibacy is not a symptom of the reform of the Church, but it is a symptom of a serious decline in the ecclesiastical customs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Pius V. It wasn't just lip service. He was a man of action, taking real action, real reform, really cleaning things up within the Church. He was serious about it, and we certainly need some of that today. I want to move on to the excommunication of Queen Elizabeth I. You write that the bull of excommunication of Elizabeth I, quote, represents one of the high points of the pontificate of Saint Pius V. Can you explain why that is? In particular, can you connect the dots for how the clarity provided by that excommunication led to the daring apostolate, the missionary epic, as you call it, of preparing priests like Edmund Campion and Robert Parsons, future saints, to secretly enter England ready to give their lives as the price to prevent the Catholic faith from dying out in their native country?
On the 25th February 1570, Saint Pius V signed and promulgated the bull Regnans in Excelsis, with which he pronounced a sentence of excommunication against Queen Elizabeth I, declaring her to have lapsed from her claimed right to the English crown. Her subjects were not bound to their oath of fidelity towards her, and under pain of excommunication they could not show her obedience. Pius V made known to all the world the position of the Church of Rome toward Elizabeth Tudor, because the Queen of England was a heretic and schismatic. And without such a declaration, without the bull, without the excommunication, the Saint Pius V would have endorsed the idea that the English state church was still part of the Catholic Church. And so the bull was necessary, and the bull resoundingly condemned the so-called third party of the Church Papists, and encouraged the party of recusants, encouraged the recusants to resistance. And despite the failure of the insurgency, under Saint Pius V, the great movement of Catholic rebirth in England began, sealed by the blood of hundreds of martyrs. And the bull of excommunication of Queen Elizabeth, criticized by political Catholics, constituted in reality the foundation and presupposition of a missionary epic, and represents, in my view, one of the high points of the pontificate of Saint Pius V, because it expresses the principle according to which it is necessary to bear witness to the truth of the Catholic faith until death. I think that it is this is very important. I mean that saints like Edmund Campion or personalities as Robert Parsons represented a model of missionary similar Edmond Campion was a Jesuit. In this time, we know that Saint Francis Xavier in the East, in China and in India, developed a missionary action as strong as the missionary activity, the missionary apostolate of Edmond Campion. So there are two different kind of missionary. It is the same missionary spirit, encouraged by Saint Pius V.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He actually believed in spreading the true faith and actually calling people on to conversion, saving souls. And imagine that there were political Catholics that didn't like the excommunication, but the fact is that it truly was a loving act towards making it clear to Elizabeth I herself, but also making it clear to everybody else what the true faith is, what the truth is, and what was taking place, and it just made it clear for people, a great blessing in all of that. And then people have their free choices to make, and hopefully they make good ones from that once they have that clarity. But St. Pius V, also the victor of Lepanto, he was the architect, and he attributed the victory to the power of the Rosary. We are coming up on the 450th anniversary of the victory of Lepanto this year. What do you want people to know and to remember as we approach the anniversary?
Yes, the Christian victory of Lepanto on the 7th of October 1571, whose 415th anniversary is commemorated this year. This victory is closely tied to the name of Saint Pius V. And on his tomb in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, we see the Pope seated on his throne as he hands the banner of the Christian fleet to Don John of Austria, the winner of the Battle of Lepanto. And St. Pius V knew that there would not possible truce with Islam until the Ottoman Empire was definitely annihilated. Pius V was the true author of the Holy League promulgated on the 27th May 1571 in St. Peter's Basilica. And the clauses established that Pope Pius V, King Philip II of Spain, and the Republic of Venice constituted a perpetual league, both offensive and defensive, against the Turks in order to recover all the places usurped by them, by the Ottomans, from the Christians. And although Pius V never used the term crusade, perhaps because by his time it was reserved for the indulgence valid in Spain, but there is no doubt that the Santissima Expeditio, the Latin name, he conceived and promoted in 1570, fully corresponded to the traditional concept of the crusade. So St. Pius V organized a true crusade against Islam, and the victory of Lepanto was not for him only a point of arrival, but was the beginning of a possible reconquest of all the Christian East. And also after Lepanto, at the center of Pius V warriors during the last months of his life was the defense of Christendom from Islam. death prevented the Holy Pontiff from fulfilling this great dream of restoring religious and political peace to Christendom. But it was his great ideal. And you have to remember that the very roots of Europe are be found in the Gospel.
Yes, very, very good. Yeah, I highly recommend the book Saint Pius V. Just on the historical points of the Battle of Lepanto alone, very much worth reading. But there's so much in here that is worth reading. When we get back in the final segment, we're going to hear about the chapter on the Pope of the Catechism, the Breviary, and the Mass. Wait till you hear about St. Pius V in this regard, and we're going to apply some things to our present day. Very, very good stuff coming up here on The Simple Truth with Professor de Mattei. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
We offer several ways to view our programming grid, including at our website, thestationofthecross.com, and on our iCatholic Radio app. Just click the menu icon in the top left portion of our app and select the link to our programming grid. That's at thestationofthecross.com and on our free iCatholic Radio app for Android and Apple mobile devices.
Jesus 911. Now, weekdays at 2 p.m. Eastern.
My name is Jesse Romero. I'm a retired Los Angeles cop. I'm a Catholic lay evangelist. My show on spiritual warfare is called Jesus 911, where you got 3 retired LA cops, Ruben Nava, Eddie Chavez, talking about the Catholic faith and teaching you spiritual warfare, how to defend yourself against the devil, the world, and the flesh.
Catch the Soul Patrol. Jesus 911, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, on the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Hello, this is Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life. Paul tells us we must not conform ourselves to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of our minds, and know what is good, pleasing, and perfect. This means that in a culture of death, we learn, as John Paul II wrote in the Gospel of Life, that life is always a good, even when it is beset by weakness and suffering. This is Father Frank Pavone, National Director of Priests for Life.
Praise be to Jesus. Hi, this is Joe McLean, host of the Catholic Drive Time Morning Show, joining you on the Station of the Cross each weekday morning at 7 a.m. We'll keep you informed and inspired with insightful guests and breaking news stories of the day. That's the Catholic Drive Time, weekday morning, 7 a.m. on the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic Radio app. We'll see you then. May God love you.
Welcome back. Jim Havens here on The Simple Truth with Professor Roberto de Mattei, Catholic historian, author of 35 books, including his newest book, recently published by Sophia Institute Press, Saint Pius V, the legendary Pope who excommunicated Queen Elizabeth I, standardized the Mass, and defeated the Ottoman Empire. You can find it at sophiainstitute.com. Professor de Mattei, your chapter on the Pope of the Catechism, the Breviary, and the Mass is incredibly timely, important reading for all Catholics, I'd say essential for all seminarians due to the much-needed historical context that it provides, especially following Pope Francis's recent motu proprio Traditionis Custodes. What are the most important points from this chapter that you would like to share with us?
Yes, Saint Pius V promulgated 3 documents, the Catechism in 1566, the Breviary in 1568, and the Roman Missal in 1570. The choice of these 3 actions was not casual. The intention was to actuate a true reform, beginning with what the clergy taught prayed and celebrated. And the relationship between the doctrine of the faith and the liturgical cult may be compared to that between the body and the soul, between the thought and the word. Therefore, in its formulas, rites, and symbols, Catholic liturgy ought to reflect its dogma, and so also its pastoral application should be coherent with doctrine. In this sense, the Roman Missal promulgated by Pius V expresses the truth that the Catechism had summarized and that the Council of Trent had defined against the Protestant innovators. So the Catechism, Missal, and the Breviary are different but complementary expressions of the same tradition of the Church. Pius V restored the Roman Missal with the bull Quo Primum of the 19th July 1570. This bull does not introduce anything new, but restores the liturgy of the Church disfigured by Protestant and humanist innovations. And the Mass of Saint Pius V perfectly expresses the Catholic regula fidei, rule of the faith. The motto proprio of Benedict XVI, Summorum Pontificum of 2007, reiterated that the traditional rite restored by Pius V has never been abrogated, and that every priest has the full right to celebrate it anywhere in the world. Now, the motto proprio, Traditionis Custodes, that you have of Pope Francis, you have quoted, interprets this motto proprio of Pope Francis, interprets the right to celebrate the traditional Mass as a privilege. A privilege which, as such, could be withdrawn by a new pope. But this modus procedendi is arbitrary because the lawfulness of the traditional Mass does not arise from a privilege, but from the recognition of a right. And this right, this principle, Benedict XVI recognizes, that is the immutability of the bull Quo Primum of Saint Pius V. So, in my view, no pope has the right to abrogate or change a right such as the so-called Mass of Saint Pius V, so-called the Mass of Saint Pius V because it was the Mass of the Apostolic tradition. And in this sense, we must thank Saint Pius V for the gift of this Roman Missal, which has passed the centuries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, very helpful. How would you compare the current pontificate of Pope Francis with that of Saint Pius V? And as a historian of Saint Pius V, what advice would you give to Pope Francis if you could sit down with him today?
Well, I would suggest that Pope Francis take as an example the spirit of prayer of Saint Pius V, because Saint Pius V was a pope filled with a supernatural spirit, while, in my view, Pope Francis will be remembered as a political pope. And I would like to explain myself better. When I say that Saint Pius V was a spiritual pope, I don't mean that he was not interested in politics. The creation of the Holy League against the Turks, for example, was a political and diplomatic work. But every political and diplomatic action of Saint Pius V was the consequence of a supernatural choice, was the consequence of his spirit of prayer. So Pius V did not belong to the ranks of the political or diplomatic popes who have often governed the Church. Before Pope Francis, for example, Paul VI was a political pope. Neither St. Pius V, neither the Blessed Pius IX were political popes. Saint Pius X, and Blessed Pius IX were spiritual popes, as like Saint Pius V. So, like his predecessors, Saint Gregory the Great or Saint Gregory the Seventh, or like his successors, Blessed Pius IX or Saint Pius X, like these popes, Saint Pius V lived his lofty mission in an eminently supernatural manner, with his gaze turned solely to the glory of God and the good of souls.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and any advice based on that? Well, I guess that's what the advice you would give to Pope Francis, I guess, to be not the political pope, but to be the spiritual pope. Is that right?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Very good. Anything else? Any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us today?
I would like to thank you for the interest shown in my book on Saint Pius V. Your interest and that of the listeners is proof that the Catholic Church continues to live in the example of its popes, its saints, its doctors of the Church, and his martyrs. So thank you very much for the possibility you have given me for this conversation.
Absolutely. The pleasure is ours. Professor Roberto de Mattei. The book is Saint Pius V, SophiaInstitute.com.
St. Joseph